Recording. Hello again, it's me Chaz back in another video, and we are back with a UEFA World Cup qualifying video because now we are in the playoff stage. The final chance for a nation from the UEFA zone from Europe to qualify for the 2026 World Cup, which takes place in the United States, Canada, and Mexico. There's a total of 16 nations left, and only 4 of those nations will qualify. Those 16 nations are broken up into four different paths. The 4 nations in each group or each path will compete in a mini knockout tournament. The nations that win their semi-final will then go up against each other, and those 2 nations, whoever wins that match, will then go on and will qualify for the 2026 World Cup. Let's talk about each path individually. So Path A, the 4 nations in this path are Italy, Northern Ireland, Wales, and Bosnia. Italy will go up against Northern Ireland. Italy are the home team, and Wales will take on Bosnia. Wales are the home team. Now, out of these 4 nations, Italy by far are the most successful at the World Cup, winning a total of 4 World Cups, first in 1934 and the most recent time in 2006. They're also the first European nation to win the World Cup and the first to win it twice in a row. With all of these things said, though, Italy have failed to qualify for the last 2 World Cups. Italy only failed to qualify for a World Cup once before this happened, and that was back in 1958. So missing 2 World Cups in a row was new to them, and for them to miss a 3rd one would actually be a record, because no nation that has won the World Cup has ever missed out in 3 World Cups in a row. They did play well in their group, winning all of their games except for the matches they had against Norway, where they lost both games to Norway. But here they have another chance. I mentioned Italy's got the most experience and the most rich history at the World Cup and in general over these other nations. We have 2 home nations though. We have Northern Ireland, who will take on Italy. Northern Ireland haven't competed at the World Cup since 1986, and that was the 3rd time and 3rd and last time they qualified for the World Cup. So they haven't been at many World Cups themselves. Very long time since they've competed at a World Cup. Northern Ireland actually qualified because of their performance at the Nations League. They've actually finished 3rd in their group. They did have Germany in their group, but Slovakia finished above them as well on 12 points. Northern Ireland was on 9. But because of the playoffs, the Nations League, they managed to get into the playoffs. They made their World Cup debut back in 1958, along with their fellow home nation member Wales, who qualified for the World Cup for the first time in 1958 and returned back to the World Cup in 2022, the last World Cup, which was held in Qatar. That is a record for the longest gap of returning to a World Cup. But Wales has a chance to make it 2 World Cups in a row, finally starting a World Cup streak. They had Belgium in their group, and North Macedonia was challenged them as well. They only missed out by 2 points, but Belgium ended up qualifying for the World Cup. Wales would be taking on Bosnia and Herzegovina. Bosnia and Herzegovina qualified for the World Cup as an independent nation for the first time in 2014. That was the first and only time that they have qualified for a World Cup. So again, they're looking to return. They had a really good competition with Austria and Romania in their group. Again, they also missed out in qualifying for the World Cup and the group stage by only 2 points. Austria was the nation that managed to qualify over them. Romania also qualified themselves because of their performance in the Nations League. Okay, that was the nations in Path A. Italy take on Northern Ireland. Wales will take on Bosnia. I personally believe we're going to see Italy and Wales go up against each other. And I think Italy may just qualify. I don't think it's going to be 3 World Cups in a row that they miss out on. Let's move on to Path B. So the 4 nations in Path B, you have Ukraine. They qualified for 1 World Cup back in 2006 where they reached the quarterfinals. Good performance for a debuting nation at the World Cup. However, they haven't qualified for the World Cup since then. They will be taking on Sweden. Sweden have the most history at the World Cup in this path out of the 4 nations here. They are also the only ones that have hosted a World Cup back in 1958, where they reached the finals of that World Cup. They made a few semi-finals as well, though the last time they was at the World Cup was 2018, so they missed out in Qatar. So the first match in Path B, you'll have Ukraine taking on Sweden. Sweden had a terrible performance in their World Cup qualifiers. They lost majority of their matches and only had 2 draws. They ended bottom of their group, in the same group as both Slovenia, Kosovo, and Switzerland. Switzerland ended up being the group winners and qualified for the World Cup. Kosovo coming in second. Slovenia third. Even though Slovenia came third, they didn't make it into the World Cup UEFA playoffs. But Sweden, despite finishing bottom, have begun because of their performance in the Nations League. So that's how they've been given another opportunity to try and qualify for the World Cup. All right, one of these nations will take on either Poland. Poland, do have a bit of history. They have, at the World Cup, they have reached 2 semi-finals in the past. First in 1974, where they ended up winning the playoff, 3rd place playoff, that is. And they did it again in 1982, again winning the 3rd place playoff match. Well, since then, they haven't even reached the quarterfinal. They made their debut back in 1938, 6-5 against Brazil, where they did lose, but that was a very interesting way to make your World Cup debut. They did that back in 1938 again. They will be taking on Albania. Albania have never qualified for the World Cup before. There's a chance this may be their first. They'll be going up against Poland. Albania was in a group with England. England dominate that group, winning all of their games. England was a good 10 points above Albania. I actually watched the opening game between the 2 nations. Yeah, I was at Wembley for that one. That was a pretty good game too. That was all right, actually, I should say. Skelly scored in the 20th minute and then Kane made it 2-0. Thought Albania did put up a good defensive front, but at the most part, England was in control. Albania's other challenger, though, was Serbia, and Albania just about by 1 point was able to qualify, or I should say make it into the playoffs. And that's Serbia missing out on the World Cup. They actually qualified at the last World Cup, Serbia. Poland was in a group with the Netherlands, only 3 points behind the Netherlands, Poland was. So just missed out by 3 points. I think this one's a little more trickier to predict. If I'm going to base it off of how Sweden played earlier, I'm going to go with Ukraine and Poland in the final against, them 2 in the final. I will say Poland will just about beat Ukraine and they will qualify for the World Cup. Poland was at the last World Cup themselves, by the way. They're the only ones in this path that did qualify for the 2022 World Cup. So yeah, I'll go with Poland. Let's move on to Path C. Okay, in the nations in this path, unlike the other 2, none of the nations qualified for the last World Cup. And it has actually been quite some time since any of these nations have actually qualified for the World Cup. First, we're starting off with Turkey. The last time they qualified for the World Cup was back in 2002. They reached the semi-finals, finished 3rd overall at that World Cup, beating South Korea, who were the hosts or co-hosts. They beat them to get the third place. A funny story between Turkey and South Korea. They were actually made their debut together back in 1954. But yeah, it's been a while since Turkey qualified. There's their chance. They will be taking on Romania. Romania, one of the original 13 nations, but they themselves haven't qualified for a World Cup since 1998. They will be taking on Turkey, as mentioned. We also have Slovakia. As an independent nation, they've only qualified for one World Cup. And that was back in 2010 when South Africa hosted the World Cup, the first World Cup to be hosted in Africa. And their opponents is Kosovo, who have never qualified for the World Cup as an independent nation. So that's an interesting one between Slovakia and Kosovo. Slovakia, as part of Czechoslovakia, reached 2 World Cup finals back in 1934, the first ever all-European final. And then they took on, sorry, that was Italy, by the way, they took on. And then in 1962, they took on Brazil. Unfortunately for them, they lost both finals. But again, Slovakia, independent nation, they haven't qualified for a World Cup. I mean, they only qualified for one in 2010, as mentioned. And Kosovo, as a part of Yugoslavia, 2 World Cup semi-finals. But the difference between Slovakia is seen as the successor nation, or one of the successor nations to Czechoslovakia. So they keep the same record. That's what FIFA does. Kosovo, on the other hand, Serbia is the only nation that FIFA recognizes as the successor nation to Yugoslavia. So Serbia still keeps Yugoslavia's record, while the other nations, such as Kosovo and Croatia, Slovenia as well, they have their own sort of records. But yeah, again, Kosovo hasn't qualified for World Cup. But again, they have a chance here. Turkey were in the same group as Spain, and to be fair, I think Turkey, only being 3 points behind Spain, they actually did put up a good fight, a good chance there. So yeah, only 3 points behind Spain. Spain obviously went into that World Cup qualifiers as the current holders of the Euros. I mentioned earlier with Romania when I was explaining how Bosnia and Herzegovina managed to get into the second round or into playoffs. Despite finishing third because of their performance in Nations League, Romania was given another chance to qualify for the 2026 World Cup. And I also mentioned how Slovakia earlier qualified when I was discussing Northern Ireland. Again, Slovakia came second in the same group as Northern Ireland. Germany was the nation that topped their group. So because they came in second, they managed to qualify for this round. And again, I mentioned how Sweden qualified earlier or managed to make it in. Kosovo was second in the same group as Sweden and Switzerland. So because of that, they managed to make it into the playoffs. Honestly, I think the match between Turkey and Romania more or less might decide who qualifies. I mean, anything could happen, obviously, it's football. But I think the top 2 in Turkey and Romania would decide it personally. I think Slovakia will end up beating Kosovo. So I think we're looking at a Turkey-Slovakia final with Turkey going through and qualifying. Okay, we got one final path, that is Path D. The 4 nations in Path D are Denmark, who was so close in qualifying. Quality match they had with Scotland. Scotland beating them in the end, I believe it was 4-2. And because of that, Denmark was put into the playoffs. Since 1998, Denmark has only missed out on 2 World Cups, so they are a regular. They were in the last World Cup, was in a group stage with France. Denmark will take on North Macedonia. North Macedonia, as an independent nation, similar to Kosovo, as I mentioned earlier, haven't qualified for a World Cup. They actually finished third in their group, but again, because of their performance in the Nations League, they managed to get to this stage. Get I sort of explained or mentioned them earlier when I was speaking about Wales. So yeah, those 2 go up against each other. They'll take on either Czechia, who I mentioned a little bit earlier when I was discussing Slovakia. As an independent nation, they themselves have only qualified for one World Cup. That was back in 2006. So it's been a while. They were in a group with Croatia. Croatia was, for the most part, dominant in that group. Yeah, they were. They only dropped points once. The Faroe Islands actually gave Czechia a run for their money, but Czechia did go 4 points clear, and they did qualify. They will be taking on the Republic of Ireland. Ireland haven't qualified for a World Cup since 2002, where they reached the round of 16. They actually beat Hungary on being 3 points behind Portugal. They actually did beat Portugal as well in the group. I want to say this one may be a little hard to predict as well. I'm going with Denmark beating North Macedonia. I'm going to go with the Republic of Ireland beating Czechia. But then I will go with Denmark winning overall. I think Denmark will be the nation to qualify from Path D. So let's say a quick prediction again. Path A, I think it will be Italy. Path B, I'm going to go with Poland. Path C, Turkey. And Path D, I'm going to go with Denmark. Yep. Hopefully I'll upload this before those matches start. So sometime tomorrow, at best, maybe today. Well, thanks for watching, listening. I appreciate it as usual. Please stay safe and bye for now.